Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Physique Code podcast, episode 7 today. We have on our show, very lucky, all the way from Queensland, Dean Mckillop. So welcome, Dean.
Thank you very much, my friend.
And Dean is the co-owner of Flex Success, which is an extremely successful personal training, body composition, and competition preparation business that is run, if I believe, is it purely online?
Yeah, 100% online. There we are, for sure.
Okay, cool. Now, how many staff do you have, and what's your realm within your business? So we'll go through a quick overview of exactly what you do, so that people can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, so I am, as you said, co-director, co-owner with my partner Liz, both in crime and in personal life. And we are now a team of, we're 6 official full-time coaches. And then we have a couple of other little bits and pieces in the back end, that do some admin and all that kind of jazz. But we focus primarily on Gen Pop, I would say, in regards to body composition manipulation through nutrition education, and helping people find their way with diet and implementing it into their lives, as opposed to their lives being, focused around their diet, which is how a lot of people do it. And then each coach within our business has like their own sort of specific group that they prefer to work with, I guess. I prefer and specialize primarily in athlete performance, whether that be for physiques, getting on stage for aesthetic purposes, or even for controlling nutrition around performance for people like powerlifting or Olympic lifting or weight management or anything like that. And then each coach will either be a comp rep specific or physique specific or Gen Pop specific, or maybe even a combination of the two of them, depending on who they're working with and where they want to take them as an individual. So based mainly in Queensland in regards to HQ, the headquarters, but we're essentially Australia-wide. We actually have a coach now that lives in Germany, and we have another coach, Shannon, who is essentially a nomad, actually. She lives the nomad life a bit like Menno Henselmans did for at least a while. I'm not sure if he still does, but she sort of just travels around, enjoys life, and is an awesome coach.
And for anybody within Perth as well, so Alan Mal currently resides in Perth. He's just moved over recently from Brisbane, and I'm sure a lot of people are within the Perth fitness industry are familiar with Alan. So he's also a member of Flex Success as well. So just shows you the standard and quality of the business that those guys run over there, because obviously we know that Alan is one of the top coaches in Western Australia at the moment. So it has to be. So today, basically, we're going to go through and we're just going to throw around a few topics in regards to contest preparation, in terms of general hypertrophy and programming, get a few views on what you do, what you recommend, and a few thoughts on topics that we've asked the listeners to go over. So first one that came up nonstop, it came up 4 or 5 times, was on nutrition in contest preparation, and your thoughts and beliefs on specific meals, setting up like specific diets, or if it fits your macros, or flexible dieting, and within contest preparation, what you believe in and what you think is the best way to go.
Yeah, I think I've almost probably come full circle in this, in that when I initially started in the world of nutrition, not necessarily in comp rep coaching, I did the very typical bro diet, 6 meals, same foods, repetitively done, don't go outside the box. Then I figured out that I could actually eat some things that I enjoyed. Then I went full-blown IIFYM styles and realized I could fit a bunch of shit in there. And then I kind of came backwards again, full circle, to a combination of the both. And then as a coach, I've probably done similar in that I allowed far more flexibility through food type choice and variance of foods throughout the week, so across each day. So more of an IIFYM approach. In the beginning, because I deemed that it was okay for them to do that. I proved that I could do it myself in my first comp rep. But then as time's progressed, what I've found is that people that tend to just follow a straight macro counting only approach, unless they're very advanced, someone like Alan, for example, they tend to get a little bit lost in the weeds. And what I mean by that is they get hyper-focused on hitting numbers with all different types of foods and making outlandish meals, and they make the contest prep more about food than they do about performance. So my primary focus on nutrition nowadays when it comes to comp prep is kind of like a semi-flexible approach. I'm 100% flexible in food type choice. I don't really mind what people choose for their food types, as long as the protein sources are primarily animal-based, and I generally have a higher propensity towards pushing carbohydrates up as opposed to fats, which I suppose we could delve into if we wanted to, as to why. But the semi-flexible approaches that I kind of like, food type and quantity rigidity for 80% of the diet, and then the 20% is usually like the dinner and pre-bed snack. That one they can go quite flexible on each day, each night, to make a meal when they've got time to really sit down and enjoy a meal, think about what they want to eat, really, or even sit down with a loved one, for example. That's the flexible one, whereas I like the rigidity purely because it also makes the numbers and the data collection and everything like that less noisy, to use a shitty scientific term. There's less variables to consider. I find energy is better. So kind of like semi-flexible, I guess, would be my approach.
Would you look at the differences in the nighttime meals being a little bit more flexible? Would you look at that more physiological or psychological?
100% psychological.
Yeah.
It's purely for the benefit of them having the opportunity to eat something they actually want, versus eating a meal throughout the day that's prepared for the purpose of maintaining muscle mass, increasing fat loss, and maximizing performance and recovery. So it's really psychological. Okay,
so it's basically there's a quote. It's be flexible, but don't eat like an asshole.
Yeah, so, that sounds like a Broderick quote.
It is I think it is a Broderick quote. Yeah,
yeah. Or it might be a marry of the two.
Yeah, I think it actually is a Broderick quote. Don't eat like an asshole is definitely a Broderick quote. I've heard him say that on numerous occasions. Cool. Okay, and then would that apply the same in coming into sort of the last 4, 6, 8 weeks of a contest prep? Would you still run with that method, or would you try to stricten things up a little bit, or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like individuality becomes a big factor here in regards to like how can we maintain compliance the most effectively into that phase. But because some people do well with rigidity, some people do well with more flexibility, some people like a little bit of both. It's kind of like that's really the conversation between coach and athlete to determine which approach is the best in the back end when the stress is the highest, because as stress increases, poor decision making generally increases as well. But at least for the last 2 weeks, I essentially will make people go into 100% rigidity, but rigidity just in food type, food quantity, and even semi-frequency, in that I don't, again, mind if they were, say, having a bagel for their carbohydrates as opposed to oats, that bagel is retained the entire time. I just don't want the bagel to be in some days and then oats to be in other days, and so on and so on. Purely because in those last few weeks, that phase is really about, again, minimizing variability to maximize a consistent look. So I like rigidity for the last 2 weeks, because then we can regulate on electrolytes, we can regulate water, we can regulate food types. We know there's no digestive stress. We know how well they tolerate their carbohydrate refeeds based on these foods that they eat. And then when we get to peak week, the magic week, and I'm air quoting in case we don't show anyone the film of this, magic peak week comes around, we can kind of just tick it off and go, yeah, we did this last week. It's already worked perfectly, and continue on. Yeah,
that's sort of a similar method. Like, 4 or 5 years ago when I had first started, with a little bit more serious within contest prep, I think I was using specific diets, but I also think it was probably part of me. It was just a little bit uneducated on, on different food varieties and different calories, different macro types and things like that. But obviously, like, as you learn a little bit more, you can, and you educate, yourself, or if your client is a little bit more educated, which hopefully they are, if they're doing a contest prep, then, they can sort of, work out what foods work best for them. Because, the typical chicken, broccoli, things like that, broccoli can bloat a lot of people as well. It's not a perfect food, and just finding what works for the client, and obviously what's going to work with their adherence and things like that, and be able to, stick to their diet to get the best result possible for them. So I think it's the flexible, semi-flexible way. I think, would you find as well, has the best adherence?
Yeah, because I think, there's 2 problems to both of these approaches. There's one each. So the problem with 100% food rigidity, where you don't believe you have the opportunity to have a flexible choice in food groups, is that it would be extremely ignorant of you as a coach to believe that every athlete that you take on is going to have the capability to maintain the same diet day in, day out without making any mistakes, licking a spoon, or sniffing something that they think is delicious and then smashing the whole thing. Like, that's a really ignorant behavior, a really ignorant belief to have. So there needs to be some flexibility. But then it's also the problem with giving people too much flexibility is then they start to just become kind of like assholes, I guess you could say, in regards to their food choices. And they just become really, really, really pedantic about it all. And they make this, it's almost like gamification. Like, what can I possibly fit?
Yeah,
so
that's what you see a lot of the burgers and ice creams that,
yeah,
ice cream is the carbs for the entire day, and then the rest of the day is protein shakes and meat. Yeah.
yeah. And then the other problem with the fully flexible approach, though, is that most people actually don't know how the fuck to count. Like, one of the biggest things we do in a lot of ours in the initial phase is education around how to count macronutrients appropriately. How do you even like trade in fats for carbs, carbs for fats? How do you do that accurately? Where do you get your information from? Do you trust my fitness search function? Heads up, no, it's shit.
Yeah.
So like, we need to teach people how they can count accurately so that if they are to manipulate the food types, they can at least do it in a manner that doesn't impact the data and the feedback and the fat loss and the deficit and all that kind of stuff as much as possible. So it's also why I like the semi-rigid approach, because I'm kind of saying, here's the optimal diet that I believe that you should consume based on the conversation that we've had. You should be able to comply with that. But should you get to one afternoon and you've run out of steak, you now have the capability to swap for chicken. And that makes you now a fully fledged, autonomous, really like individual client that is relying on me mainly for my maths, like you would an accountant, as opposed to relying on me to tell them, oh, how much do I eat? So it gives a little bit of ownership back to the athlete, but it also means as a coach, you have to be aware that there's potential issues with errors and so on, which is a risky one too.
Yeah. Okay. So that was one of the main questions that we actually had come through. Now, the next one we have, we're going to pop it straight over to training.
Yeah, cool.
And we want to talk about periodization for contest preparation. Now, there's a lot of cross views on this, on, should you periodize and how it's done and whatnot over phases over, 1 week to 4 weeks to 6 months to 12 months. What are your views on periodization for a hypertrophy athlete? Which, is it something that you look at in the long term? Is it something that you look at in month to month basis, or what are your views?
Yeah, I think obviously it's important to define the concept of periodization is realistically just planned stuff over time. Like, that's the baseline understanding of what periodization is. So absolutely, yes, I plan an approach over a given amount of time, and that will depend on the person again. But one thing I would say that I've become more and more adamant about in my periodization of programming specifically, less than nutrition, is I'm more reactive now with deloads, whereas previously I was probably more proactive. I used to sort of allocate deloads in given weeks based on the intensity or volume that I thought that they were going to be able to achieve. But what I've learned over time, and also the fact that being online as opposed to face-to-face and having the ability to sort of see the work ethic, is that often proactively deloading just meant the person never really made it to the true overreach. Whereas now I can get it more reactive, and then that reactive nature allows me to also manipulate the programming more consistently. It might be like a 3-week deload versus a 6 for another person versus an 8 for another person. So, but I definitely focus heavily on performance progression over time for all physique athletes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, in terms of hypertrophy, if you're not achieving progressive overload, then essentially you're not building muscle, and you're sort of defeating the purpose of what you're trying to do as your primary goal for training. So,
yeah.
So, I'll go on.
I was going to say, I think it's lost in the wash with the bodybuilding community that periodizing and focusing on progressive overload over time is for a performance athlete, and they forget that performance equates to a better physique.
How many skinny guys do you see benching 250 kilos or squatting 300 kilos? Not too many.
Yes. Yeah, no. But what about yourself, man? What's your preference in regards to periodizing programming for a physique athlete specifically?
I would say for general population clients, I'm a little bit more, as you would say, reactive to what I do in terms of the training. Now, and the only reason I say that is I will have a general plan, but a few years ago, it used to be like, a plan, 4 weeks of training and then a deload. That's how my program would go to a client. It would have, this is what I think you should progress, and then we're going to do a deload. So same sort of thing that you were saying there. But what I sort of found with general population clients was that they, life gets in the way a lot, and sessions end up being missed. And if you miss 1 or 2 sessions, then all the numbers are going to be way behind, or the progressions aren't going to happen the way you thought. So I sort of am a little bit more reactive with periodization and with programming. So I sort of go month to month with a general idea of where I want to take them within the next program. But specific numbers, specific volume, specific intensity, things like that, I sort of will wait until the end of the training block to determine whether I need to give them a deload, or whether I need to, switch the training split days, or, maybe they need to decrease volume because it could be somebody that's got exams, for an example, or something like that, or real, they've lost their job, or any stressor. So I sort of will go month to month now. In terms of the contest prep clients, I'm sort of a little bit less flexible, because, if they have that specific goal, then they should be, we should have a general understanding between the two of us of what they're getting into, and then the results that are required, and what the work is going to take to get to the point that they want to get to. So I sort of map that out a little bit further, maybe 3 or 4 months in advance, on what I want to do with programming. The diet is always reactive for me, because I'll do the skin folds, do the numbers, do whatever measurement I'm doing, and then I'll make an adjustment, obviously, on the result that they've gotten through that week or fortnight that we've done the testing. But yeah, in terms of programming, I wouldn't look more than 3 months, depending on how far out they are from the show, obviously. But I wouldn't look more than sort of 3 months in advance, 3 to 4 months. And then with general populations, I generally look a little bit more month to month. Just as I said, because life comes up, and you got to factor those things in a lot. That'd be something similar to you with general pop.
Yeah, so I personally don't do Gen Pop, but like I am essentially very similar to you. Even with when I say that I'm generally reactive, it will be kind of like, this is where it should be with the deload with an athlete. But can I get more out of you potentially? Then I may push the limit. But it's always first program is reactive, and that first program, it might take them 4 to 6 weeks to get to the intensity required for them to actually deserve or require a deload. Deserve's probably a bad word. But then from then on, I can pretty much tell with the guys and girls that I've had for a longer period of time, I know this person goes backwards as of week 3 when I hit them with X amount of volume. So, but then for my long-term preppers, I will actually look 12 months if I have the opportunity to, but it's very baseline periodized, where it's like, this should be primarily a volume focus because this is where I want food to go. This one will be a little bit of like a concurrent strength hyper approach. And then this one might be here, depending on what it is. So there's like this overreaching concept. And then I map them in 4-week blocks, pretty much like yourself as well.
So you do all your programming sort of over 4 weeks, or so 4 to 6 weeks?
4 to 6. Well, when the initial phase is always like in a 3 to 4 week block, and then I each week when I look at their performance and how it's progressing across time, then I'll manipulate the weeks as they go potentially. But it's generally like one proper mesocycle will realistically last a minimum of 6 weeks. Probably a maximum of around about the 12 to 14 is when I find people just get bored shitless and stop going ham.
I think that's also like one of the big contributing factors too, as well, is like, frequency of training programming changing, I think is, whether they're getting results, but also people just lose motivation, and then all of a sudden they lose intensity on the exercises because psychologically they just sort of tune out because they're used to doing the same sort of thing. So I think that's another really big factor that people won't actually factor in when they're starting to write a program, if they're writing it sort of 6-8 weeks out in advance. And obviously if you get to know the client, you've worked with them for a very long time, then you can sort of pick up and track on all those things like you were saying. So yeah, that's quite similar actually. So it's good.
Yeah, man, I probably have one guy out of 8 clients right now that I reckon I could give a program to. And if he hated it, he'd still go balls to wall, but only one. Like the rest of them they just go backwards. Because
that's a dime a dozen.
Yeah, man, and he is like, he literally is nearly a dime a dozen. So I'm sure he would be even if I added an additional 4 people to that list. There's just no one that, so I'm not even one of them, So
yeah, I'm sort of similar on that. Like I've got amp myself up for things that I don't want to do. But and
Yeah.
as much as you try to, it's sometimes it's just hard to you can probably push the extra 10% on deadlifts over something you don't want to do.
Yeah, I think programming within a prep, though, is fantastic for mitigating that particular issue. If you're somebody who has high intrinsic drive, because the guilt of losing to yourself due to a lack of effort from the week's prior performance, for me, weighs very heavily
Yeah.
on my heart, and I just can't do it. Whereas if I knew that if those numbers didn't exist, and I think this applies for a reason why a lot of people's physiques regress in a prep too, is if they didn't exist, I'd probably just say, yeah, I trained hard today. Like it felt bad. It felt hard. It hurt. But truly training to a program, understanding that performance last week was at its peak and now you have to re-peak again, requires a tremendous amount of effort and commitment. And those individuals always look better on stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you focus a lot of your in terms of exercise selection, you focus a lot of your work on compound movements? How do you what about sort of like compound moves with frequencies and training? So what's your ideal on programming for frequency and exercise selection?
Well, exercise selection, I'll go through even just the discussion we mentioned before in regards to what do you like, what do you hate. They're my first two questions with programming. What causes issues? What can you overload effectively without causing issues? So there will always be a prime mover, which is usually going to be a compound of some description that will be heavily focused on for a strength or mechanical tension progression over the course of time through each movement pattern, whether it's a horizontal pull, a vertical pull, a hip hinge, a squat pattern, whatever they may be. I'll pick one or two exercises within that and they kind of will stay the same and they'll stay within a fairly similar range of repetitions because I'll use it as sort of like the marker of success throughout a prep, I guess you could say. And then likewise, they transfer into the off season, which is then the same marker of success for hypertrophy. Like if that one's going up, we're good to go. And then after I get through those, they're traditionally just going to be like straight set work, potentially a wave load, potentially just straight volume, whatever it may be. Then I start to tap into the individual's preference for how they get through sessions, time requirements, and then also preference of frequency and how much volume I'm trying to get through the individual. So 9 times out of 10, most people are going to be on between a 4-day to 5-day program. Not many people get a 6-day program, depending on the individual and time constraints. I do like to hit frequency up in the 3 days per week for things that people struggle with in regards to growth. Because I find if they traditionally don't grow very well there, they can't handle a ton of volume through it in a single session. So I'd rather give them more volume across the course of a week over 3 sessions as opposed to 2. And one thing I've probably changed or is now a little bit more individualized in regards to intensity versus volume.
It's a hot topic right now.
Yeah, is some people are really, really good at finding their limit and getting like a true RIR, to use Mike's terms, of 1 or 0 for that matter, if you wanted to get them there. And then other people are really far off. But what I found is the majority actually are really far off. So I push people more towards trying to find their lifting failure point than I do pushing set volume up like Mike would, because I tend to find, at least in my online space, that individuals that think they're getting to an RIR of 1 are really kind of like a 4 to 5. And then adding more and more volume in over time just realistically creates more and more fatigue, which funnily enough, now Mike has also coined this stimulus to fatigue ratio. And it's just time spent in the gym, more stress, and they just don't really know how to get to their limits. So I tend to push people more towards now pulling volume down a little bit from a set point of view and getting them to their limit. Once they've learned their limits, then maybe I'll drive volume as a preference. But
yeah. It's kind of interesting. Mine actually is a little bit slightly different to that, and I can understand all the benefits to yours. And there's a few key downfalls I find in mine, as well as benefits to it. Now, I always look at obviously time restraints, strengths, weaknesses, things like that. I generally try to go for 2 to 3. Most muscle groups 2, weak points. Sort of 3 a week. So when you would do your weaker point training, you would do, say, frequency of 3 times a week. You wouldn't have compound exercises. high fatigue exercises on every single day, or would you start the week, say it'd be like higher fatigue at the start of the week, and then as the week goes on, you'd use less fatiguing movements?
Yeah, it's almost like DUP-esque, like
Yeah.
move into, it's generally going to, the back end of the third session is usually going to be a metabolic thing, or
Yep.
it's going to be, the third day would be like very, very low volume, but like an occlusion or a rest pause-esque type approach. So fatigue is minimal,
Yep.
but stimulus is still effective.
Okay. Yeah. So that's sort of similar to mine. I would generally run, say for example, I using 5 or 6 day splits. I would try to hit the majority of the muscle groups minimum twice a week. The first session of the week being a little bit heavier with a little bit more of the compound exercises, and then the second session using the higher rep ranges and trying to add a little bit more volume on uh, the less fatiguing exercises.
Mm-hmm.
But and if within those workouts, if somebody comes in and say they can only train sort of 3 to 4 days a week, which I mean, this is going to go back to general populations clients a little bit. I have a tendency now where I try to find the exercises clients enjoy doing the most, and I try to stack them at the start of the workout, just on the basis that the exercises they like, they have a tendency to push a little bit harder.
Mm-hmm.
And I find I get a little bit more intensity out of them that way, and then sort of so for example, on legs, I may use if the client, I feel like, either can't perform a squat to failure using the quads like we want them to, I may use the hack squat, because they feel a little bit safer, so they're probably going to push a little bit more intensity. So I'll sort of have a look at it in that regard, which I suppose is still quite similar to yours. But yeah, in terms of the frequency as well, I sort of just look 3 days a week for the weaker point areas. Obviously, with weak point areas, I think it's probably good to mention as well that one of the first things I look at before total volume would be, or total intensity would be, the movement pattern of the exercise. I'm sure you'd find as well, there's a lot of people that come in and say, my legs just won't grow. And then, they may film a video of the exercise and they're performing it fucking terribly. It's like, okay, well, if we fix your movement pattern, then you probably don't need all the excess sort of junk volume to get the muscle to grow.
Yeah.
So
Hamstrings aren't growing on a hip hinge just because you're using your lower back.
yeah. And there's a lot of people, that when they'll, we always go back and use Tom Platz. He was built for squatting with quads. He could sway his back, wouldn't feel anything until, his quads would literally shake and convulse before anything else would give out. But, for a lot of people, that biomechanically, they just can't do that. So, whereas something could be a great exercise for one person, the same, movement pattern as you were saying, the hack squat might be or a leg press might be much, much more beneficial for one person compared to the next. So, but I think, at the end of the day, all the principles right there are exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, you have to progress the tension of the movement pattern or the muscle over time. Like, that's just the given principle that we're all familiar with, that is most conducive to muscle growth.
Yeah.
How you achieve that is then really about smarts. Like, how do you set up the week for each individual? Like you said, you choose the appropriate exercises that they can go for. I think it's one of the lucky things with me being in the physique world as opposed to the performance world. Like, I don't program for powerlifters, is that I'm not forced to do squat, bench, dead.
Yeah.
So, like, if somebody doesn't want to do it, they don't have to, and if someone does get lit up through their back on squats, it would be, again, really ignorant or incorrect of me to have such a dogmatic belief system around a particular exercise that is said to be the best leg exercise. Because if it's jacking their back up and then it means I can't throw volume through their posterior chain, it's really poor programming. So I actually have a fairly similar approach to using that. I pick the exercises that need the most amount of work to progress over time at the front end of the week, and also they're generally going to be the most difficult. And then I load more of the sort of metabolic-y stuff in the back end. But funnily enough, like, if you ever spoke with Alan, he actually does it inverted for his guys and girls in prep, because he likes to essentially associate refeeding with heavy days because of the psychological benefit of knowing you're fully fed to then get under a heavy squat bar. Whereas I'm like, they don't need much glucose or glycogen available for that, whereas they may want some of it for the really heavy volume-based work. So we kind of have a differing opinion there, and we sometimes like cross bridges and do both. But the cool thing is they both achieve the same result.
Yeah. And it will almost, it's with a lot of things, I think, within programming and dieting is, a lot of things get the right result. It's just going to be a matter of, tailoring what to which specific individual. I know for a fact that I can take two of my clients that are both, top level athletes that I train completely different in the weights room and I diet completely different. But they both achieve the same result. It's just, one person will adhere and respond, psychologically a lot better to one method while the other person will be the complete opposite.
Yeah. I think that also comes back to, I know we have another question there on how to determine a good coach. And that is a coach that should be good is one that understands principles through education as opposed to following or regurgitating protocols. So like if a coach has the capacity to give you a particular protocol to follow, they should also have the capacity to explain the principles in which it works, and to do it in an open conversation like we're having now, as opposed to behind a keyboard where they can Google and throw the Google answer back down on there. And that's the cool thing about like Alan's approach versus my approach versus your approach, is that the principles all are aligned. It's the application of those principles that changes. And that's the really cool, fun, exciting thing about being a coach, is that you have the opportunity to individualize.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those things that just comes down to experience. It's like, I've done mentoring with a lot of trainers, and it's a really hard thing to teach. I think I found anyway. You might have some ideas for me, but yeah, it's one of those things that for me, it's just come down. I think I've gotten better at it over the years. And for me, it's just come down to experience of dealing with different types of clientele and understanding, how they psychologically work, to get the best result. And so yeah, it is an interesting topic. And like you saying, how many times you go on the forums and people come up and say, oh, I think, this way is better, or this way works better for this, or, science said this, or this article said that. And it does, I think a lot of it does come down to how the client's going to end up reacting to it.
Oh yeah, man. Like there was a post yesterday in a group of ComPrep co-posts, and it was like, when should I cut out alcohol in a prep? And I thought, this is going to be an absolute laugh of a reply. And of course, there's people just singing their Hail Marys. Oh my God, alcohol in prep, you can't, like from day one. Oh, you should never drink it. And like nobody asked the question of how much alcohol, how frequently should you have that alcohol? Does that alcohol consumption make you feel guilty? Do you feel really good? Is it relaxing? Is it a part of your family dynamic to have a drink once a week? Like nobody asked anything that allowed the person to actually make an informed decision behind their choice of alcohol, the pros and the cons. Instead, people just like freak the fuck out because they think alcohol is some terrible, again, air quotes, that's going to hurt people. And the reality is that if you understood, again, the principles of like how to measure that alcohol consumption within the caloric requirements of the athlete, where does it lie on the stress versus no stress versus stress relieving front for that particular person? Those are the things that makes a coach, and that requires experience for sure. But it also requires you as a coach to pull your finger out your ass and actually to learn and appreciate that, one, compliance is the most effective nutrition protocol, and it's also the most effective training protocol that you can implement. And being a dick about your approach and saying that it's just flat out black and white, yes or no, is a really, really, really fast track way to having shitty results.
Yeah. It's almost like, it's funny because, everybody will not mock, but, everybody finds it funny to say like, oh, brown rice is good, white rice is bad, or, something like that. Whereas it's like, it just automatically labels things as good and bad. But, when it comes to alcohol, it's almost like it's not caught up to that yet.
Yeah. I have a saying that I've used for, I think nearly everything that I ever discuss with nutrition or training. When somebody says like, are artificial sweeteners good? Are they bad? Whatever the question is, like they want a very black and white answer. And it is always insert X thing. So let's just say alcohol. So alcohol is neither good nor bad, but it could be good or it could be bad.
Yeah.
And that for me is essentially all of the principles that we're talking about. It's how they're applied as to whether or not they would be good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah. It's almost impossible to turn around and say, to turn to somebody and say, that's a bad food. That's a bad, this is something, this is just, nobody should ever do this, sort of thing. And was it, I think Luke Lehman was saying it, we said, the answer should always be, it depends, but it depends is if you actually back up why you say it depends. Which
Absolutely, he said that, and I think that's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
And he almost channels in my brain sometimes. I swear, that guy, because he has such good lines, and he's also such a charismatic dude, and he's got just a bullshit level of information hiding away in his big brain.
Yeah.
It is. I say it depends so frequently, but there's always like, it depends, and here's the asterisk, and then here's the secondary asterisk as to why. Now you come up with a decision as to what you think is the most appropriate for you.
That's exactly right. It's funny. It's funny. I think just as a general view on that I still think, I think the next, we're obviously in the information era right now, and there's a lot of information that comes out, but I think something that's lacking, not just in contest prep, but just in coaching in general is the theory is all there. And a lot of people know amazing theory, but the actual ability to coach and deal with a client, I think is probably, I think that area needs to be brought to light a little bit more. And I think, that, because that's the sort of stuff that, you look on all the bottom of the pyramids, and, it's like training hierarchy, and adherence is the bottom, and diet hierarchy, and, adherence is the bottom. So I think a lot of people, that's a missing link for coaches. Is,
oh yeah, dude, if it came down to just smarts alone, Lyle McDonald would be the best coach in the world.
Yeah.
There's no way that he is. Because no one's going to be able to follow him because he's such an asshole to so many people. But my God, is he smart, Yeah. So 100% agree.
Yeah, I think that's something that's probably will improve the industry, the contest prep area, as well as just general populations. And one of my mentors, Phil Lerney, who we had on the podcast previously, I think, he's all about that bottom level of the hierarchy with adherence. And, I think when he goes back, it's the same sort of thing. It's like some people, strict diets are the best diets. Some people, and it's just a matter of, communicating to the client and, looking at issues they're having if they can't stick to diets, and, determining maybe this is going to be a better method. Maybe I need to educate them on that. So I think when people start focusing on that a little bit more, the, contest prep, general population, just body composition as a whole, within this industry is going to get so much better.
Yeah. It's unquestionable, man. I mean, you look at the data of success rate of fat loss or weight management in general population after 5 years, it's sub 5%, right? And we all know as coaches, even the worst PTs that have just come out of their first 3 weeks of getting their certificate, know that an energy balance is the determinant of weight loss or weight management, right? We already know that, but what we haven't figured out is how to keep people where they want to be as opposed to where they naturally sit based on their previous behaviors. And that really does come down to having appropriate conversations, learning to listen, learning to ask the right questions, and becoming a better coach of the individual so that they can implement and make more informed choices around their food, their lifestyle, their stress management, and their training. And I think like that to me is the biggest win as a coach, is when you can allow the client some autonomy back to their life, and they do use informed practice to make smart decisions as opposed to following protocols, like I said before. Because if the only thing you ever want to do is do what you're being told, the moment you're no longer being told something, you have zero chances of being successful. So informed education is the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, coming back to it, just like topics of behavioral psychology and having, Dr. Mel from RP come out and, go through her talks. And, a lot of her talk was simple stuff, but nobody does it. Or, and it's almost just like, these are the very, very basics that, nobody's doing. So, once you start applying these things, then everything else that you spent years learning, and all the studies and everything like that you see, they come into effect after you learn how to do, deal with the client's behaviors and psychology. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of why I actually push myself into the physique development / athlete realm, though, is because I do really like being able to say this is the best approach. And the mindset that is required to be that person kind of is conducive to the type of coaching that I like to provide. So I'm by no means the guy to help people with the long-term adherence approach. I like to think that I'm still better than the majority, but like our other coaches within our business, my partner Liz and all the rest of it, that's their jam. Like they really hone in on the questions and the opportunity to implement, as opposed to me just saying, this is the best way, let's get this done.
Yeah.
You know, my result is very time specific, whereas the result for a Gen Popper is life.
Yeah.
So it's very different.
So Gen Popper is a little bit more habits, but you know, when you get, you know, and I tend to lean a little bit more towards you these days, whereas I think I enjoy someone come in and say, this is the date where, you know, it doesn't have to be a contest or anything, you know, it can just be, this is the date I have a photo shoot, or I have a wedding, or I have a birthday that I want to look my best for. So, you know, I've got X amount of weeks, you know, this is the measurement I'm at right now. This is the goal measurement we want to get to. Let's create a plan to get you from, you know, A to B within that given period of time.
Yeah, it's actually, you mentioned your mentor Phil before, and you also, the original question of myself in the beginning of whether or not I believe IIFYM is an appropriate dieting practice for prep and all the rest of it. And that is that I've actually sat on the fence of recent to promoting flexible choices within dieting in a contest prep, because what I've actually started to recognize is I'm getting individuals that have come from a previous very dogmatic coaching approach where they're told this is the only thing you can eat, can't eat anything else. They learn that they can actually probably do better because they learn by what they see within the athletes that we work with, as well as myself. And then they come to me and they have this notion that my way is easier. What they forget is that dieting is never easy when it comes to physique prep if you want to get lean, because it's the lean part that sucks, and that hurts regardless. And what I was tending to see when they came and then they were being given these moments of enlightenment, oh, I can eat this, it then switched off their capacity to be very driven, regimented, athlete-minded individuals, and instead it made them quite relaxed. And then they started to give less of a fuck, I suppose you could say, to nutritional accuracy, and they become more free in their choices, which then they start to make more errors, and their compliance is worse, and all the rest of it. It's almost like you've taken the weight off that kind of kept them within the constraints that they needed to have. So now a lot of the time when I get individuals that have come from a previously very strict approach, they get given like a little bit of rope, but not a lot. And then over time, it's kind of like a slowly feed them new information, new opportunities, so that they can actually implement it to suit them, as opposed to them just being like shocked at the freedom. And I've found that's actually been quite, again, enlightening for me, because here I am thinking like, I'm going to make your life a lot easier, and making it easier actually made them less effective, which is kind of not cool. But that's why I think now I have this semi-rigid approach.
That's interesting. So when you would apply that, would you go back to what you were saying earlier about sort of, you know, the dinner and the pre-bed meal? Start by giving them more flexibility there, or would you sort of run the approach of saying, you know, here's 5 different meat choices, and would be the amount you'd have from each one. So, you know, pick your meals based on these specific choices.
Yeah, we step them through it. So I kind of do like a really fast version of what we do with our Gen Poppers, but within our Gen Poppers, they actually have a 12-unit learning thing that they go through with us to teach them how to count macros appropriately, and some of the information around dieting, nutrition, and all that kind of stuff. But they'll start on a rigid diet that they have to do the exact same thing for at least 2 to 4 weeks, but it's 2 food preferences. So let's just say you had someone that did literally just exclusively chicken and broccoli for easy sakes and white rice. It might be that then for 2 meals, I take the white rice out of one and I add just 1 meal of, let's just say, cereal, right? And then they learn that that one meal of cereal is actually okay, but it's still rigid and controlled because they don't have daily flexibility of choice. And then over time, it's kind of like, okay, now you're on a rigid diet up till dinner. Now that you've learned through these exercises that you can change things here and here, let's have a go at doing a mock dinner. They practice the skill. Once the skill's been practiced to a sufficient level that I think they have the capability to do it themselves, then I let that piece of rope out. It's like, cool, now you can do your dinner. And then there are individuals within my prep clients that do their entire days. There are some that do full rigidity, but with like the food choices is up to them, and I'll change it for them weekly if they want to change a bagel for, you know, a bread roll or whatever it may be.
Yep.
And then there's other individuals that kind of do a hybrid approach, but it's definitely baby steps for sure. And then sometimes, like, you know, you can swap rump, trimmed rump, eye fillet, and 5% fat beef mince within a 200-gram serve. They're all going to be within a couple of grams of each other. So if you just want to flip them throughout the nights, then you know that you can have 3 different meats that are fairly similar, and it's not going to impact anything later down the track. And they start to just learn bit by bit.
Okay. And just on a side note here as well, if you guys want recipes for ribs or brisket or anything slow cooked, or you just want food porn, make sure you go over to Dean's Instagram or Facebook page. It is out of control. This guy's a chef.
It's my new one. I'm trying to become a pitmaster, mate.
Oh, you're trying to become a pitmaster? Yeah,
No,
it's
I'm not actually. I just bought a charcoal barbecue. It's hella fun. I feel extremely masculine. And I just, why not? I try something new.
yeah. Well, when we get you out to Perth, we'll have to make sure that you cook up a feast.
It sounds fine by me. Yeah, yeah. I'm actually doing ribs again this week for a friend because I'm like, oh, they were my best one yet. So I'm going to hit the repeat button on those and just change the game up a bit.
Okay. All right. We got one more question today. We'll go through. We mentioned it earlier, and we'll just run through this one quite quickly. But what would be, this is a question again I asked every single person that we bring on the podcast. What would be your advice for somebody looking to find a coach, or what would you look for in a good coach? So 3 quick tips on 3 things you look for.
I think like previous results is important if you're in a result-driven sport that requires a coach to get you there. However, that will come with the asterisk of ask as many open-ended questions as you possibly can of that individual in a face-to-face video consult or in a sit-down consult, not over email, because it's going to give you the opportunity to have a conversation. And that conversation, you should be able to start to see red flags. If you think anything sounds like too good to be true or outlandish or doesn't come with the asterisk or the it depends comment that we've mentioned now, I'd start to have a little bit of hesitation. And then if you have the opportunity to try and ask current or previous athletes of theirs what the experience was like. And I think getting both is important because it's probably going to lend you an idea as to what it's going to be like for you. And post athletes, just like customers of previous businesses, are always going to be generally pretty honest. And if you get like a really good feedback from them, despite the fact they don't work together anymore, that would be great. Yeah.
Okay, cool. There's actually, it's interesting that, everybody that comes on and we ask that question to, generally, they'll have a different variation of the same answer.
Mm-hmm.
Results. A couple of the things that some people say as well is like you look at results and sometimes it can be little bit misleading with like genetic potentials for clients,
Yes.
I think. But again, that's something that, that's a variable you can't control. So, and the trainer can't control either. If somebody gets really good results, then they're genetically gifted, then that's a bonus. But yeah, looking over a different range of clientele and speaking
Yeah, I
with
was going to say exactly.
yeah,
Client variation is super important because it's easy to get a dude who's geared up to the nines lean even if you kill him with a diet, like it's going to work. The problem with the results in the physique world is that you can get results by starving people and just training them into the ground, which is like, I don't really like the answer of results, but like they are important because that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
But I think really asking the questions, or at least asking somebody that you trust to see if they've asked the questions, to really see if they can delve into the weeds of the information that they're providing is super important.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good one for me personally.
So it all comes back down to communication again, like absolutely everything we've gone through today. So I think that's going to be the overlying topic of the day for us here is, communicate, whether it's with potential coaches, whether it's with your athletes, if you're a coach, and just make sure that you're able to understand each other to provide the best possible result for clients.
Absolutely. And it's a huge red flag if the coach isn't willing to communicate the answer back to you. So if
Yeah.
you ask why in a polite manner, hey, I'd like to understand why, as opposed to not, why do I do this? But rather, I'd really like to know why. And they can't actually give you that answer, run for the hills.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, we've had a good time. We've had a good chat today. There's been a lot of really good general information as well as contest and programming information. As I was saying to you earlier, we are going to try our very best to get a bunch of people over east over to Perth to run a 1 or 2 day seminar at the Physique Code, as they've been previously quite successful. So I want to try and find the best and brightest minds over east and west to set up a seminar over here. And I hope that we can get you out here to be a part of that and to talk to the Perth fitness industry.
Yeah, I'd love to bring the team, mate. To be honest, it'll be really cool, and From everything I've seen over there, you guys do a fantastic job. So it'd be awesome to be a part of it.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm going to put you down as a tick.
Double tick.
All right. Thank you so much again, Dean. So do you just want to run over your Instagram page or your Facebook page, or where people can find all your information or your food recipes at?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the best place to see myself and the team in regards to what we offer from an education point of view and information is just flex_success on Instagram, or Flex Success. I think it's Flex Success is on Facebook. You can find it there. The website is www.flexsuccess.com.au. So it's nice and easy. On the topic of communication, the great thing is every day on Instagram story, we have a different coach go through stuff that they like to talk about. So people can kind of get to know us without really having to know us. I'm always attached to that. So you'll be able to find me through that if you want to have a look at, my food recipes and my rants. But the best information is actually on the business page for sure.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on again today. And we'll be sure to have you back on in the next couple months. And we got a few other exciting topics that we want to get you to cover.
Sounds awesome. And thanks to all those that gave us the time to listen. It's much appreciated.
All right. Have a good day.
Thanks, man.